Welcome to the Saturday Cadence podcast. I'm Blake Biscardi, and remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. We've got one game left, and it happens to be the national championship between two of the sport's most storied programs in Ohio State and Notre Dame, as they are set for a matchup on Monday in Atlanta, the national championship game for the first time in the 12-team playoff era. Welcome into Saturday Cadence. My name is Blake Biscardi with David Wertheim alongside as we get ready to break this game down for you, give you previews on offense, defense, special teams, head coaching matchups. We're going to dive into it all. David, seeing this matchup here, this is a pretty cool national championship game, seeing these two brands, these two storied programs, all the stories and everything each team has had to overcome this year. There's just so much that is going into this game. I think it's going to be a phenomenal matchup on Monday. I think we're going to see a lot of defense. I'm really excited to be there in Atlanta and see this one.
Yeah, it's great that you're headed down there, and I'm sure that'll be an awesome time. And yeah, I mean, we almost got this matchup back in 2012 when Ohio State was banned from a bowl game. Obviously, Alabama ended up getting that spot, and we know what happened after that. So kind of full circle now, all these years later, the first year of the 12-team playoff, we get Ohio State and Notre Dame for all the marbles. And yeah, like you said, it's a historic matchup. These two teams are no strangers to this game. Ohio State's got 8 championships. I believe Notre Dame has 11 in their program history. So, obviously the Northern dominance is coming back in college football, and it's cool to see these two historic programs battling it out here on the main stage on Monday night.
It is, and we've seen these two teams play actually the last 2 seasons where Ohio State has won both of those games. But David, it's notable to see that Ohio State has not scored more than 21 points in either of those 2 games. They scored 21 in the first matchup 2 years ago, and then only 17 to win the game on a walk-off last year. So for those people saying that Notre Dame needs to make this a game for them to win, where they muddy the waters, use that Michigan blueprint, because they're built very similarly, although Notre Dame likes to play more man coverage. Do you think that that is a likely path for Notre Dame to keep the Buckeyes around that 20 points, 21 points, 24 points even for this game, to keep them in it, Notre Dame, because they've got to find points somehow? They're a little bit banged up on the offensive line. Do you think it is reasonable to expect or come into a game with a plan that you can keep this Ohio State team around that 20-point mark?
No, I don't think that's reasonable. They scored 28 against Texas, obviously 7 coming off a defensive score. And that feels like their low mark, right? I mean, the second drive of the game, they're marching down the field again. Travion Henderson gets called for a 15-yard personal foul, knocks him out. They get a holding penalty on the next drive, knocks him out. They get a holding penalty and a false start on the next drive, and that knocks him out. So, Ohio State only scored 28 points in that game, and it feels like they left a lot on the table. Obviously Tennessee and Oregon were nowhere close to holding the Buckeyes to 20 points. So I feel like that is somewhat unreasonable. I really, the more I think about it now, I mean, Notre Dame's going to have to do what Texas did and get lucky with some penalties. Texas didn't force any Ohio. They did have the interception off Will Howard. I forgot about that. So Notre Dame will have to do something similar. They'll have to get one themselves, some kind of turnover, whether it's an interception or a fumble or something like that. They're going to need one of those too, just like Texas had. Because Ohio State scored 28 and left a lot on the table. So this is going to be a challenge for Notre Dame. And, Penn State obviously was in that same kind of range, that 27-ish points mark. And they almost got it done against this Notre Dame team. And, they're going to need points. And I think that's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky the more I think about it for Notre Dame to catch up with Ohio State, unless Ohio State has some catastrophic mistakes, even more so than they did against Texas.
Well, we talk about a lot with football that it's a game of matchups and how styles make fights and all of these things pertaining to when you see these two teams collide on the field. And if you look at the matchup of Ohio State and Texas compared to Ohio State and Oregon compared to Ohio State and Tennessee, you can see where Texas was going to match up with Ohio State best mano-a-mano. They have probably the second most, if not equal talent to the Buckeyes in the sport. And that's no knock on Oregon either, because they're very talented. But in the key position groups like the offensive line, the defensive line, Ohio State's freak wide receivers, while Texas has a really good set in the secondary, and vice versa too. Texas has great speed on the outside, and Ohio State's been great in coverage, have 2 safeties. So that game was always going to set up that way. But now, David, when we look at this game between Ohio State and Notre Dame, Texas was able to sit back and play zone coverage because that's the strength of their defense. In that pass defense, they ran bracket coverage on Jeremiah Smith, which I think the world predicted to happen, and they executed it well, holding to one catch for 3 yards. I don't think that Jeremiah Smith finishes the national championship with a similar stat line. Notre Dame likes to play a lot of man coverage, though. So in doing so, they do that over 90% of their snaps. And we've talked about this with Ohio State during the season. They started slow. Their pace has been a little bit slower because Ryan Day said he consulted some of the NFL guys. He also has an NFL background, spoke with Chip Kelly. They wanted to preserve those guys for this moment here in the playoff. And it was a wait and see mode for us the entire year, saying, well, are they ever going to flip that switch? And they have done that in the playoff. They've started fast. They're 3 for 3 on opening drive touchdowns in the playoffs. If Ohio State starts fast that way, and they're able to exploit that man coverage from Notre Dame, that's where I think it could drag Notre Dame into a lot of trouble. So when you see this styles matchup between the Buckeyes and the Irish, what jumps off the page at you that either team could take advantage of when you're seeing something like that?
Well, I think Ohio State has their superior athletes, up and down the board. And that's something that they could use as an advantage for sure. I mean, we've seen it, even for example, against a team like Indiana. And I think this Notre Dame team, obviously they proved it a few weeks ago, is much better than that Indiana team, but I'm just using them as an example. You could throw Penn State in there as well. We've seen Ohio State out-athlete those teams before. And while I don't think that's going to be the case this time, it is certainly an advantage they can go to. I mean, Jeremiah Smith is a freak. They have freaks all up and down the defense. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson out of the backfield. I mean, we're seeing really for the first time a healthy Travion Henderson this late in the season. And the plan that the Ohio State staff had from day one was to rotate Trey and Judkins in order to keep them both fresh for a game like this. So that plan has worked out masterfully. And so for Ohio State, Notre Dame, both of their lines are banged up. Ohio State's defensive line has been really, really good in this playoffs. Obviously, they were excellent against Texas. Sacked Dylan Gabriel a bunch of times, pressured Nico Iamaleava all day long against Tennessee. So Ohio State just needs to, play their game on defense, do what they've done all year. And then on offense, just don't turn the ball over. And then for Notre Dame, they're going to have to make some splash plays. They're going to have to find a way to manufacture some plays. Maybe we haven't seen it this year, some of those trick plays, and give themselves a chance. I mean, the spread I think is reasonable for a game like this. Ohio State, the talent advantage is clear. But Notre Dame, they're going to have to find a way. And I really like what these pundits are saying. They really are going to have to muddy the waters here and make this a game. Because I don't know if both teams played their best game. I think Ohio State wins pretty easily, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, especially when you're looking at the way these teams match up and you take injuries into account. There's a lot that both of these teams have had to overcome in the injury department there. Ohio State down 2 stars on the offensive line. And what a job that Luke Montgomery has done coming in there. Austin Saraveld, Tigger Shabola, they've rotated some time there too. All 3 of those guys. Donovan Jackson has moved outside. So lots of guys out of position or fresh faces for the Buckeyes up front, but they've been holding up in this playoffs. And then on the flip side there for the Ohio State defensive line, David, you mentioned this, they've been a wrecking crew here in this playoffs, getting 16 sacks in 3 games. Now facing a depleted Notre Dame front, who's going to be missing its left tackle, according to head coach Marcus Freeman, there's going to be opportunity for Ohio State again. So I know we talk about the flash of the offense with Ohio State, but let's really hone in on this defense here for the Buckeyes matching up with this Notre Dame offense. What is the plan for Notre Dame? And then if you're Ohio State, I think when you're looking at Notre Dame's offense and what they present, Jeremiah Love is banged up. I assume that he's going to play. I can't see him out in the national championship unless there is something with his injury that is going to keep him off the field where it's dangerous to play. But that's not to say Jadarian Price is not a great option there at running back as well, the 1-2 punch that they have. And then Riley Leonard with his legs. I think that's the recipe that Notre Dame has to use. They've got to find success running the football. And you are famous for saying this every time we have a show where we talk about a big game. Yep, exactly. You say it's hard to run on the Buckeyes, and it is. The quarterback run, though, that's probably the easiest way to run on Ohio State, for just to say that because it's difficult with the running backs. If Ohio State can contain Riley Leonard and his legs and force him to win the game with his arm, that's what I think Ohio State has to do. You've got to either put Cody Simon or you're going to have Caleb Downs one-on-one with Riley Leonard. I'm going to take Caleb Downs in that sense. But if Ohio State can shut down Riley Leonard in the run game, that's where I think this is going to become a really, really challenging game for the Irish.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that, for Ohio State, we've seen Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs from that safety position just flying downhill all throughout the playoffs. Ransom delivering big hit after big hit, Downs making tackle after tackle. They've both been excellent. Same with Cody Simon, who was the defensive MVP of the Rose Bowl. He's been excellent as well. So I think Ohio State has to like their chances. I think they were exposed a little bit with Sonny Styles and man coverage last week against Texas, and their screen game out of the backfield was pretty impressive. So I think Notre Dame will try some of that with their two good running backs. And Ohio State just has to be disciplined and sound in that kind of coverage and can't allow those big plays to happen down the field. And that's really the recipe to beat Ohio State is you have to beat them down the field. Obviously, Michigan beat Ohio State. They scored 13 points, and several of those were off a turnover. So, to say that Michigan beat Ohio State because of their offense is just not factual. So I'm not really putting much stock into that. The way to beat Ohio State when they score more than 10 points is to have big plays. And I don't know that Notre Dame can do that. They're going to have to do that. And they're going to have to be sound and disciplined. And similarly to Ohio State, the only way they can lose this game is to create, if they have a lot of penalties and turnovers. The only way that Notre Dame gets out of this game early is by turnovers and penalties. So Notre Dame needs to play a sound game too, or else they're going to be out of this game early.
Yeah, David, all the things you're mentioning here, and with Notre Dame and how they've got to attack Ohio State, or at least find creative ways to affect the game or change the game, whether it's a momentum play. And we've seen this with Georgia and with Penn State in those two matchups. Notre Dame did not do hardly anything productive offensively. Riley Leonard had 90 passing yards. They ran for 152 yards. But you know what they did? They forced a turnover and got a short field. They kicked a field goal there, or they scored a touchdown off of that. Then they returned the ensuing kickoff outside of the half for a touchdown on special teams. Then at the end of the game against Georgia, when they're trying to close it out, they basically run the hockey line change where they subbed out all 11 players. Georgia didn't know what was going on. Hardly anybody knew the rule there beside Notre Dame because they did some research. That's the hallmark of Marcus Freeman. You can see so much of Jim Tressel with his emphasis on special teams. And then against Penn State, they found the big passing play and the two turnovers late in the game. So that's the recipe, like you're saying, is I don't know offensively if Notre Dame has the horses to score with Ohio State's offense punch for punch. But like you're saying, if the defense is able to find the turnover and convert it for points, or if they're able to find something on special teams, whether it's a fake field goal, fake punt, a kick return, a punt return, something of that nature, I think Notre Dame has to have non-offensive points in order to feel comfortable about their chances to win the game. And I'm not running them off because I think Notre Dame is a great football team. I think that their defense is excellent and their offense has done enough, and they actually average more points per game than Ohio State, believe it or not. But when you're looking at these two teams, you see this with Ohio State, how they're playing in this playoff. You've got to do something to take the ball away. And we've seen Will Howard turn the ball over, and we've seen also Ohio State get lulled into these games where they're just trying to force feed running the football. So what's your expectations for Ohio State's game plan offensively against potential man coverage here? And then I would assume they would probably double Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah, my expectation is that they're going to break it all out. I mean, they're not saving it for anything else. And, we've seen them willing to be aggressive here. We saw it against Tennessee and Oregon, obviously, and even on some level against Texas. I mean, on that first drive, they were inches away from converting another 60-yard touchdown pass to Jeremiah Smith. So they have shown that they are willing to be aggressive in this whole playoff, and I don't expect that to change at all. So, people are saying about that run game like we saw against Michigan. I think there were other factors there. I think there was a clear Will Howard head injury that hasn't really been brought forward publicly necessarily, but it was pretty obvious to those who were watching. And he's Howard, other than that one throw against Texas on the interception, he's been pretty much flawless throughout the playoffs. So I think they will continue to be aggressive, and I think they know what's at stake. This is it for Ohio State. I mean, if you lose this, you're kind of back to where you were when you lost to Michigan. So I think they're going to be aggressive, and I think they're going to pull out all the stops here. And I think these guys know what's at stake. And that's not to say Notre Dame doesn't, of course, but I think Ohio State's going to be motivated and ready for this one.
David, the quarterback battle here between Will Howard and Riley Leonard. It's documented that these were the two that Ryan Day looked at the most in the transfer portal to lead Ohio State this year. And they settled on Will Howard fairly quickly. But when you see these two quarterbacks in the battle that they're going to have, which quarterback do you believe in more? And I know it might be an obvious answer to say Will Howard, but I do think that there's plays to be had for Riley Leonard, especially with his legs, because we've seen that affect Ohio State before. It's not really beaten Ohio State, but we saw Dylan Gabriel run a lot with his legs in the first Oregon-Ohio State matchup in Eugene. So if Leonard can do that, I think that's something that could change the game. And Will Howard's like just the same. He's not run a lot this year, and you keep saying it. We all know it. This is the last game of the season. There's nothing to save anything for. There's nothing to hold off from this game plan. Ohio State's going to be aggressive. So how do you look at this quarterback battle between Howard and Leonard?
Well, for Howard, you mentioned he didn't run a lot. They did finally pull one out there on that fourth down late in the game against Texas, and he ran. He probably should have had a touchdown if he didn't fall down, but able to get a 20-yard gain nonetheless. So that was good to see, and now something that Notre Dame will certainly have to prepare for. I like Riley Leonard a lot too. My answer will be Will Howard. I just think he's shown a little bit more this year at the vertical passing game. He's shown that he's able to hit those throws. The running game, he's shown that he's able to do that and lead that. And he's shown that he did have that bad interception where he kind of stuck on Jeremiah Smith. But that was the only time I really noticed throughout that game that he did stick on Jeremiah Smith. He was willing to take the passes to Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate, G. Scott, Will Kazmarek. Travion Henderson obviously had that huge screen pass. That Howard did a really nice job standing in there with pressure in his face and giving Henderson a good ball with which he could make work. And so I think I feel better about Howard, but Leonard is a great quarterback, and he's led Notre Dame to some great wins this year. Like you said, his legs are a real threat for Ohio State, although I do think the Buckeyes, since that Oregon game, have been much better overall on defense, but especially with handling the quarterback running game. Jim Knowles moving Caleb Downs down into the box, rotating Jordan Hancock back at times, and having Lathan Ransom play downhill seems to have worked. And I expect that to continue as well. And I think the Buckeyes will have a good plan for Leonard's legs and try and make him beat them with his arm.
Well, Riley Leonard's won some rugged games, whether it's at Duke or at Notre Dame. They've won some physical games at Notre Dame this year. So I think this is going to be a complete physical battle. And David, I wrote about this in my piece this week, and I know that we've talked about this before, but how Ohio State beat Texas late in the fourth quarter. That's a game that this team probably loses last year or 2 years ago, where you get into that one score game, your offense is kind of sputtering. Either the offense plays well at the end or the defense plays well, but they didn't play as a team to close out the game. That's been the thing that Ohio State's had to get over in the playoff. Now we know Day with the Michigan problem with the last 4 straight years, separate issue right now, because I think it's been put to rest that they can win the big games in all these different ways. They've blown out Tennessee, they've blown out Oregon with elite game plans and stout defense. And then we saw them with Texas. How are they going to respond against Texas? This is the 3rd game in a row here. Odds are you're not going to blow them out. And like you said, they left things to be desired on the field. So we don't know if they executed everything perfectly, what that game would have looked like on the scoreboard. But I think it was so important that Ohio State was able to win the game the way that they did. Now, it was complete jubilation when Jack Sawyer hit up Quinn Ewers and return that scoop and score for 6 to ice the game there at the end. But for Ohio State to go down the field in an almost 8-minute drive in the fourth quarter, take the lead with a touchdown, and then Texas almost goes right down the field, and now they're inside the 15, pass interference, another pass interference. The ball goes from the 2 to the 1. Now you got 4 plays to win the game here for Ohio State on defense, and then Texas, they move the ball right down there. What's to say they can't get it in the end zone? Well, because it's impossible almost to score on Ohio State in those goal-to-go situations, and they got that stop. And then they won the game with complementary offense and defense. And I think that is going to be the thing that when you look back on this team, what the best part of this playoff run was for them, should they cap it off with a national championship win, was how they did it against Texas. Because Notre Dame is physical, they are disciplined, they do not beat themselves, they force turnovers, and they're good on special teams. So you have got to be all units a go when you're playing a team like that. Even with the talent disadvantage that Notre Dame has, they do all of those things well, and they will not beat themselves. So Ohio State's got to be ready to go here for 4 quarters.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And, let's not forget, even after that Jack Sawyer interception, they still had another decent possession to play, and they ended it with a Caleb Downs interceptions. Trade the ball on another turnover. Yeah, I thought they closed up that game really for them to continue that momentum. And Notre Dame will be huge. They got to get a stopper early and, put their best foot forward in the game for sure.
No doubt about that, David. So let's move into some keys to the game here. We'll start with Ohio State. What are the keys to the game, or who, you know what, let's do it this way. Who are the X factors for Ohio State if they want to win the national championship?
Sonny Styles is one of them for sure. He needs to play discipline, cover his routes out of the backfield, don't get beat deep, and make the sure-handed tackles when he's there. I think that is definitely priority number one there. Number two would be, I would really say all the Ohio State corners, whether that be Davison and Igbenogson, trying not to get any penalties. I know that's extremely difficult for him, and you kind of just live with it. You have Denzel Burke, who missed a huge tackle in that Texas game, allowing an extra 30 yards, and then was either hurt or benched. It's still unclear. And then Jermaine Matthews, who came in for Burke, really played a nice half, but he needs to stay sound. He's had some times this year where he can get a little jumpy and aggressive, and it comes back to bite him. Kind of gives me Cam Taylor Britt vibes for the Bengals a little bit. Jermaine does. But Cam Taylor Britt played an excellent second half of the year. So Jermaine Matthews played an excellent second half against Texas. So I could definitely see him playing well again against Notre Dame. And I'll switch now to the offensive side, and I would say it still remains the offensive line. They've been so good, stepped up so many times this year for Ohio State with all the injuries that they've had, whether it was Seth McLaughlin with a torn Achilles, whether it was Josh Simmons with a broken leg, even Austin Sierravel was banged up the last couple of games, and Luke Montgomery had to stay in at left guard. They've been excellent, and I still think they're the X factor. They still got to play a good game, keep Will Howard clean, no penalties like they had against Texas, and that would go a long way.
I'm with you on the offensive line, and I won't reiterate everything, but we've said it all playoff long. Ohio State will go as far as the offensive line takes them, and the offensive line has taken them to the national championship game. Now they just have to punctuate it and finish the job here. But on offense for Ohio State, I'm going to go Emeka Ibuka. He is the senior. He is one of the unsung heroes of Ohio State, where he may not have the flash all the time, but he impacts the game in every way imaginable. And this is his last game in the Scarlet and Gray. This is the reason he came back here to get this game. He said it in his pregame speech that the day of the Cotton Bowl was not his last day at Ohio State in that uniform, that it was going to be on January 20th. And now he's got that. And he's closing in on 1,000 yards on the season. I know that's not something that he cares about. I do think that he gets it. But I think Emeka Ibuka is going to be the X factor for Ohio State on offense. We all know about Jeremiah Smith. We know about the running backs. Give me Emeka Ibuka to be the X factor for the Buckeyes offensively. And then defensively, I'm going to say Ohio State's defensive line. And maybe that seems like a really easy answer here because they've just been otherworldly in their pass rush without even having to bring extra men. But I'm going to say Ohio State's defensive line because the way that Jack Sawyer has come back, the play that he made in the Cotton Bowl, his play that he's elevated even through the Michigan game, that interception gets forgotten about. Well, he got his redemption play there with the scoop and score. JT Tuimoloau was a little bit banged up. But in those situations in the red zone, if Notre Dame gets down there, I'm going to bet on the Ohio State defensive line to slow down that running game because that's how Notre Dame wants to score. That's how they need to score. And I don't know if they're going to be able to do it against that vaunted front because it's been so good in those situations. I know we've seen the screenshots all over Twitter this week where you see this goal-to-go situation against Oregon or against Nebraska, or two of them against Penn State, one of them against Michigan. Then you have another one against Texas, and you say all of these situations Ohio State has faced this year, and the amount of points it resulted in was 7 for Ohio State, which is just crazy to think about. So I'm going to take the Buckeyes defensive line. And then if we switch over to Notre Dame here, David, who are the X factors for the Irish when they're trying to beat Ohio State to win a national championship?
Well, I think it's Riley Leonard, first of all. I mean, he's got to play a sound game and win with his legs and not turn the ball over. And again, that's kind of a cop-out answer because he's the quarterback. But, I really think he's the X factor in this one. Notre Dame is going to need elite quarterback play in order to beat Ohio State here. And on the other side, I think it's their linebackers. Notre Dame has really good linebackers, several of them that Ohio State wanted on their team. So, they are really talented in that area. And those guys are going to need to handle Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Will Howard, if he decides to open up and use his legs. And then obviously Ohio State's really good at making action happen over the middle in the passing game. And those defenders are going to need to, handle the tight ends crossing and all that good stuff. So I think Notre Dame's linebackers are a big key here. I think they traditionally play 2, sometimes 3, but I think they're going to need to play big.
No, absolutely, especially facing this Ohio State offense that likes to attack you in so many different ways. And with so many weapons, they have to play well, whether they're in space, whether in run stop, however it looks. I'm going to go on Notre Dame's defense to say they're secondary, especially if they come out in man coverage, which we expect that they will because that's what got them there. That's their bread and butter. They have the guys to do it. Now, Benjamin Morrison is hurt, so that is something that is going to be challenging to overcome for Notre Dame, but I think they've got to play well in this game to contain the Ohio State wide receivers. I don't know if you're going to stop them or slow them down, but you got to contain them and prevent the big play in on the back end of the defense. And then on offense, I'm going to say it's the two running backs for Notre Dame. Whether or not Jeremiah Love plays, Jadarian Price is going to be active. Notre Dame's got to convert inside the red zone or in short yardage situations. It's been tough to do. A banged up offensive line. I don't know that they're going to trust Riley Leonard's arm too much. So those running backs have to convert those situations in short yardage or in goal to go situations. So I'll take the two running backs there for the Irish. And then, David, before we get into our pick here, let's talk about this head coaching matchup between Ryan Day and Marcus Freeman. These are two of the bright young coaches in the sport. Freeman in his third year as a head coach, Day in his sixth. In a national championship game, this is a fascinating matchup here. Obviously, Marcus Freeman, an alum of Ohio State, played linebacker there for 4 years. And he has said that that doesn't matter, and that's the coach speak for it. But looking at these two coaches, who has the advantage, and what do you think of that battle between Day and Freeman?
I'm not sure that either of them have the advantage. I mean, they're both similar in that they're young guys, and that's really where the similarities end. I think Freeman is they're both. I will say they're both master motivators. I mean, what they've done with their teams has been really impressive. For Notre Dame to lose to Northern Illinois at home like they did, and then rattle off however many wins it's been in a row has been very
13.
impressive. And then 13, yeah. And then similarly for Ohio State, what they did, the clunker against Michigan at the end of the year, and then to come back and play like they have in their 3 playoff games is really impressive. So both coaches deserve a lot of credit. Freeman has obviously lost today twice, once in Columbus and once in South Bend. Both of them could have, in theory, gone the other way. Ohio State's first matchup saw Jackson Smith and Jigba get hurt on the first drive. He didn't really play much the rest of the year. The second matchup saw Kyle McCord handing the ball off to Chip Trainum to win the game. Neither of those players are no longer in Columbus. So it'll be interesting to see the differences in both teams heading into this game. But I don't really like getting into the head coaching matchups too much. I mean, it is important, but at the same time, this game's going to come down to the players on the field, and we'll see who executes better.
If you had to bet on one staff, David, to come up with a key play, whether it's a special teams thing, if it's a big offensive play or a masterful blitz, the trio of Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, and Jim Knowles, or Marcus Freeman, Al Golden, and Mike Denbrock, I think those are tremendous trios on both sides of the ball here. So is there anything that you look at when you see those two guys? I think this is going to be an utter chess match between these two staffs.
I could see that for sure. And I watched a lot of what Jim Knowles had to say this week, and him breaking down the goal line stand was just fabulous. Fabulous work by the interviewer and him at the press conference. And what he's done has been really impressive. I mean, it seems like there's always an answer there. Even after that Oregon game, the changes that he made has been almost night and day. And then you look at on the offensive side, Ryan Day, he said this week that screen pass to Travion Henderson, they asked him what he wanted to do, and he said, let's run that screen. He said it was in our playbook. We hadn't run it much all year. He said, why are we even practicing this? Because we haven't run it. Then he decided to run it, and look what happens. They get a huge 75-yard touchdown play right before the half to take the lead back and swing momentum back heading into the locker room. So I trust Ohio State, but that's not to say I don't trust Notre Dame. I mean, it's harder to scheme up a play like they had with that kickoff return or the turnover that had a short field. It's harder to scheme those up. But at the same time, it's clearly been their recipe this year that they have made those timely plays, and I trust that they can find another one somehow, some way.
Yeah, turnovers are one of the things you can't forecast, but it seems like you pretty much can when it's Notre Dame because they consistently get them every single game. And Ohio State averages just about 1 per contest this year, so you would assume that may happen again, especially with how opportunistic the Irish are. The last thing I want to say on this before we move on here is I do expect something on special teams from Notre Dame, where there's a different look, some sort of a fake. Just something's going to happen, I think, on special teams. And I think it has to for Notre Dame because they've got to find a way to get an extra possession. And I think they know that. So that'll be something to watch in the game. And I do think Ohio State will be on red alert for that, facing this Irish team. But Dave, let's hop into the pick here. This line opened up at 9.5 in favor of Ohio State. It has since dropped to 8. So the Buckeyes are 8-point favorites here. Give us your full prediction here and who wins, who covers.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if that line was from the big money or if it wasn't from the big money. Do you have any insight on that?
I do not, but we can find that out. Let's see.
While you work on that, I'll go ahead and give my pick here. I think, 9.5 and 8 isn't a huge difference, but it kind of is for me. I was tempted to take Notre Dame and then I was going to switch to Ohio State, but I think I'm going to hold steady with Notre Dame. I like them to cover. I like Ohio State to win here. I could see a touchdown game, maybe even a 14-point game, and Notre Dame gets a late touchdown or something like that to cover the spread on a backdoor. I do think Ohio State has enough to win this game. And it'll be interesting to see here over the next couple of days if that line shifts even further. But I'm liking Ohio State to win the game and Notre Dame to cover as of right now. I would put them at a -7-ish.
I think that's absolutely fair to say because Notre Dame's defense is elite. So is Ohio State's. And you can see this game being played out similar to the last two, where it is a defensive slugfest and things just happen in the game because Notre Dame can create a turnover or maybe Ohio State self-inflicted wounds. And, you kind of think about, I was talking with one of my friends and he was sending me the stats saying Ohio State has beaten number one, number two, number 4, number 5, however many teams Ohio State's beaten in the top 8. If they beat Notre Dame, they will have beaten all of them except for Georgia. So that would be 6 of the top 8 teams I would have beaten. And he said, you can also argue we've beaten ourselves. So, the 7 of the 8 teams that Ohio State has beaten. So certainly not off of the map. I'm not seeing anything here with what has changed this line to make it go down a full 1.5. It seems like it's still dropping because I saw it from 9.5 to 8.5, now to 8. I do like Ohio State in the game. I do think that this is going to be a physical game. It's going to be a slugfest. The key for Ohio State is to start early. If they can start early, there's the upend potential to open the game up a lot more. But if not, I think Notre Dame can stay in it. I think it's going to be something similar to Texas, although it may not be within a touchdown there into the fourth quarter where Notre Dame can find a chance. But I do think Ohio State will close out the game similar to how they did Texas. It might not be a scoop and score, but I do think the defense will come up big for Ohio State again. So I will take the Buckeyes to win the national championship and achieve its goal that it set out this year. And what a story that would be for this Ohio State team, this group of seniors, and also Ryan Day.
Yeah, it sure would. It would really be full circle. I mean, this class, came in 2021. They really haven't done a lot. They never beat Michigan. They won one bowl game, that being the Rose Bowl in 2021, obviously, when Jackson Smith and Jigbo went for 600 yards or whatever it was. And, since then, it's been a lot of disappointment. So it would feel really good for these seniors and for Coach Day, obviously, to cap their careers off with a championship and, move forward into the next chapter of Ohio State football.
It absolutely would. And I do think this is going to be a phenomenal matchup. I think this is going to be one the seniors want. Both teams are going to be laser focused. So I don't even know if you can think that there's a motivational edge here in this game, but I cannot wait to see this one. It's going to be phenomenal. Both of them can't wait to get to Atlanta. So we will have more coverage for you guys from there, from Media Day, have some probably none, but we will be at practice and see if what we can get you guys there. So stay tuned to the socials at Saturday Cadence, at T Silver Bulletin, our website, tsilverbulletin.com. We've got plenty of content coming out, plenty of coverage for you guys. We appreciate listening to the episode. Make sure you're liking and subscribing. Subscribers have really gone up over the last couple of weeks, as of the followers, the view counts and everything. So we appreciate all of you guys' support there. And remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. For David Wertheim, I am Blake Biscardi. We will see you next time. Enjoy the national championship game, and God bless.